Tonight, we're opening the pages of one of the world's most enduring collections of folklore, the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. Before these stories became the gentle versions many of us know today, they were mysterious, haunting, and filled with enchanted forests, forgotten castles, strange bargains, and magic that often came with a price. Tonight, we'll revisit some of those timeless tales, lovingly retold for a quiet evening of rest and imagination. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Leave a comment below and say hello. Whether you're curled beneath a warm blanket or winding down after a long day somewhere across the world, you're always welcome here. If stories like these bring you a little peace at the end of the day, I'd be honoured if you subscribed and joined our growing circle of dreamers, folklore lovers, and night wanderers. Godfather Death. Long ago, in a small village surrounded by windswept fields and dark forests, there lived a poor man with 12 children. The cottage where they lived was little more than a weathered wooden structure that leaned slightly to one side, as though years of hardship had bent it under the weight of too many winters. Every morning the father rose before dawn and worked until darkness swallowed the countryside. Yet no matter how hard he laboured, there never seemed to be enough food, enough firewood, or enough money. When his 13th child was born, the burden became almost impossible to bear. The infant arrived on a cold evening while rain drummed against the roof and smoke curled weakly from the chimney. The father sat beside the hearth long after everyone else had fallen asleep. As he watched the tiny child resting beside its exhausted mother, he felt a deep and terrible fear settle over him. He loved his children dearly, yet he could not imagine how he would provide for another mouth to feed. In those days, it was customary to choose a godparent for a newborn child, someone who would guide the child through life and offer protection and support. The poor man decided that at first light he would leave his cottage and choose the first suitable being he encountered as godfather to the baby. Perhaps, he thought, fate itself would help him. The next morning dawned grey and misty. The father walked along a narrow road that wound through the countryside. The fields were silent beneath a blanket of fog, and the world seemed strangely empty. After a time, he encountered a distinguished-looking man dressed in fine robes. The stranger's face radiated warmth and kindness. "Where are you going so early?" the man asked. The father explained his situation and his search for a godparent. The stranger smiled. "I am God," he said. "Choose me, I will bless your child and guide him with love." For a moment, the father considered the offer. Yet as he stood there, he thought of all the suffering he had witnessed throughout his life. He thought of children who went hungry. He thought of good people who died young. He thought of the endless hardships endured by the poor. At last he shook his head. "You may be God, but you seem to favour the rich while the poor suffer. I cannot choose you." The stranger regarded him sadly before disappearing into the mist. The father continued walking. Not long afterward he encountered another figure. This man was dressed in magnificent clothing, adorned with gold and jewels. His smile was charming, and his voice carried a strange sweetness. "I know who you seek," the man said. "Choose me as your child's godfather, and I will make him wealthy beyond imagination." The father immediately recognized who stood before him, the devil. Though fear prickled along his skin, he refused without hesitation. "Wealth gained from you always carries a terrible cost." The devil's smile vanished. Without another word, he disappeared. The father walked on until he reached a lonely crossroads at the edge of the forest. There he saw a thin figure standing quietly beside the road. The stranger wore simple grey clothing. His face was neither young nor old. He carried no gold, no crown, no weapon. Most striking of all was the calmness in his eyes. "Who are you?" the father asked. "I am Death." The father stared. Unlike the others, Death had made no attempt to impress him. "I make no distinction between rich and poor," Death said gently. "Kings and beggars eventually come to me alike. I treat all people equally." The father thought about those words. He heard honesty. "Then you shall be my child's godfather." Death nodded. "I will care for him." Years passed. The 13th child grew into a clever and capable young man. He possessed a quick mind, a kind heart, and an unusual sense of calm that often made him seem older than his years. When he reached adulthood, Death appeared before him. The young man immediately recognized the mysterious figure he had heard about throughout his childhood. "My godson," Death said, "it is time for me to fulfill my promise." He led the young man deep into the forest until they reached a hidden cave. Inside grew countless herbs, unlike any the young man had ever seen. The air smelled of earth, rain, and ancient secrets. Death handed him a small healing root. "You shall become a physician." The young man looked at the root in confusion. "I know nothing of medicine." "You will." Death then revealed his gift. Whenever the young physician stood beside a sick person's bed, Death would appear. If Death stood at the patient's feet, recovery was possible. The physician could administer the herb and cure them. But if Death stood at the patient's head, the person's time had come. Nothing could save them. "You must never interfere with my judgment," Death warned. "If I stand at the head of the bed, do not attempt to cheat fate." The young physician agreed. His reputation spread quickly. Again and again he cured illnesses that others considered hopeless. People traveled from distant villages seeking his help. Each time he entered a sick room, he looked for Death. If Death stood at the feet, he offered treatment. If Death stood at the head, he quietly informed the family that nothing more could be done. Because his predictions were always correct, people began to believe he possessed miraculous powers. Within a few years, he became one of the most famous physicians in the kingdom. Wealth and prestige followed, yet he never revealed the true source of his knowledge. Eventually, news of his abilities reached the royal palace. The king's daughter had fallen gravely ill. Despite the efforts of countless healers, her condition worsened with each passing day. The king summoned the physician immediately. When the young man entered the princess's chamber, he felt his stomach tighten. Death stood at the head of her bed. The meaning was clear. Her life was ending. The physician remembered his promise. He remembered the warning. Yet when he looked at the princess, something changed. She was young, beautiful, terrified. And for reasons he could not fully explain, he could not bear to lose her. An idea entered his mind. It was reckless, dangerous, and forbidden. He ordered the servants to help him turn the bed around. When they finished, Death now stood at the princess's feet. The physician administered the healing root. To everyone's astonishment, the princess recovered. That night, Death appeared before him. His expression was colder than the physician had ever seen. "You cheated me." The young man tried to defend himself. "She was so young." "That does not matter." Death's voice echoed through the darkness. "You broke your promise." Yet because of their bond as godfather and godson, Death offered mercy. "This is your only warning." Then he vanished. The physician should have learned from the experience. Instead, success made him arrogant. Months later, the king himself became gravely ill. Once again, the physician was summoned, and once again he found Death standing at the head of the bed. The king's time had come. The physician knew exactly what he should do. Yet he also knew that if the king died, he might lose his position, his wealth, and his influence. So he repeated the trick. The bed was turned, the herb was administered, the king survived. This time, Death's patience ended. That night he appeared without warning. "You have chosen your path." The physician suddenly found himself transported far from the world he knew. They stood inside a vast cavern. Thousands upon thousands of candles stretched into the darkness. Each flame burned with a different intensity. Some blazed brightly, others flickered weakly. The physician stared in amazement. "What are these?" "The lives of every person on earth," Death replied. Each candle represented a human life. Some had just been lit, others were nearing their end. The physician moved among them, fascinated. Eventually, he noticed a tiny candle hidden among the others. Its flame trembled weakly. It seemed ready to go out at any moment. A terrible realization struck him. "Whose candle is that?" Death looked directly at him. "Yours." Fear flooded through the physician. No, there must be a mistake. There is no mistake. The physician dropped to his knees. "Please, replace it with a larger candle. Surely you can." For a moment, Death seemed almost sympathetic. He reached toward a nearby candle. Hope surged within the physician, but as Death lifted the new candle, the old one finally sputtered. The tiny flame danced once, then vanished. The physician collapsed. His life was over, and so ended the tale of Godfather Death. The story spread across kingdoms for generations because it carried a lesson as old as humanity itself. The physician had been given a remarkable gift. He had been trusted with knowledge few could imagine, yet the moment he believed he knew better than fate itself, he began walking toward his own downfall. Death, in the end, had not been cruel. He had been exactly what he promised at the crossroads long ago. Fair, patient, and inevitable, for kings and beggars, for healers and princes, for the powerful and the forgotten. Death eventually arrives for all. The only difference is whether we recognize the limits of our power before the candle burns low. The Girl Without Hands. Long ago, at the edge of a deep forest, there lived a poor miller with his wife and their beautiful daughter. They owned little more than a small cottage and a patch of land, and each year seemed harder than the last. One afternoon, while gathering wood in the forest, the miller met a strange old man, dressed in rich black clothes. The man's eyes glittered like polished stones. "You seem troubled," the stranger said. "I am poor," the miller replied. "I have nothing left to sell and no way to provide for my family." The old man smiled. "I can make you wealthy. In exchange, I will take whatever stands behind your mill." The miller thought for a moment. Behind the mill stood only an old apple tree. "Very well," he said. The stranger shook his hand. 3 years from now, what stands behind your mill will belong to me." The old man disappeared into the shadows of the forest. When the miller returned home, he found gold scattered across the floor of his cottage. His wife, however, turned pale when she heard what had happened. "Foolish man," she cried. "Our daughter was standing behind the mill, gathering apples when you made the bargain." Only then did the miller realize what he had done. As the years passed, the daughter grew into a kind and gentle young woman. She spent her days helping others and praying. When the 3rd year arrived, the stranger returned. The girl stood in the yard, surrounded by a strange radiance that seemed to keep him from approaching. The old man revealed his true nature. He was the devil. "I have come for what is mine," he said, but each time he tried to reach her, he recoiled as though burned. The devil glared at the miller. "She is too pure. Cut off her hands, or I will take you instead." The miller was horrified. "I cannot harm my own child." The devil's eyes blazed. "Then you belong to me." Terrified, the miller wept and confessed everything to his daughter. The young woman listened quietly. "If it will save your life," she said softly, "do what must be done." The miller cried as he raised the axe. The daughter closed her eyes, and her hands were cut away. The devil returned, expecting victory, yet even now he could not claim her. Her innocence remained untouched. Enraged, he vanished into the darkness. The girl could no longer remain at home. She felt she had become a burden to her parents, and so she left the cottage and wandered into the world. For many days, she travelled through forests and fields. Hunger followed her constantly. She could not gather food, she could not work. She survived only through the kindness of strangers. One evening, she came upon a magnificent garden surrounded by high walls. Moonlight silvered the leaves of the fruit trees inside. Weak with hunger, she slipped through a gap in the hedge. There she found a pear tree, heavy with fruit. Unable to use her hands, she bent down and carefully picked a pear with her teeth. The gardener saw her and ran to tell the king who owned the estate. The king came at once. Instead of anger, he felt pity. The young woman told him her story. The king listened in silence. He saw her courage and gentleness despite all she had endured. Over time, he fell in love with her. Soon, he asked her to become his wife. The girl accepted. The king ordered beautiful silver hands crafted for her, and they were married in great celebration. Years passed peacefully, then war threatened the kingdom. The king was forced to leave and defend his lands. Before departing, he kissed his wife goodbye. Not long afterward, the queen gave birth to a healthy son. A messenger rode across the countryside, carrying news to the king. But during the journey, the devil intervened. The message was altered. Instead of hearing that his wife had given birth to a beautiful child, the king received word that she had brought forth a monster. Though shocked, the king sent a reply. "No matter what has happened, protect her until I return." Again, the devil changed the message. This time the letter appeared to order the queen's death. The king's mother received it and was horrified. She could not bring herself to kill the innocent woman. Instead, she secretly helped the queen and her child escape into the wilderness. The queen wandered through forests with her baby. Eventually, she discovered a secluded valley where a small cottage stood among flowering trees. An angel appeared before her. "You may live here in peace," the angel said. For 7 years, she remained hidden there. Her son grew strong, her wounds slowly healed, and one miracle morning, her hands began to grow back. Little by little they returned until she once again possessed the hands she had lost. Meanwhile, the king finally returned from war. He learned that his wife had vanished. For years he searched the world for her. He crossed mountains, he visited distant kingdoms, he followed every rumour. At last he arrived at the hidden valley. There he saw a young boy playing beneath the trees. Nearby stood a woman. For a moment he did not recognize her. Then he saw her face. The face he had never forgotten. The king ran toward her. The queen stared in disbelief. After years of sorrow and separation, they embraced. The misunderstanding was finally revealed. The devil's deception had failed. The family returned to the kingdom together, and there they lived in peace. And whenever people spoke of the queen's remarkable life, they did not speak first of loss. They spoke of resilience. For in a world filled with darkness, she had chosen again and again to remain kind. And in the end, that quiet strength proved greater than every evil that had sought to destroy her. The Juniper Tree. Long ago, in a prosperous town surrounded by forests and rolling fields, there lived a wealthy merchant and his wife. Their home stood upon a gentle hill overlooking the countryside, its windows catching the sunlight each morning and glowing warmly against the darkness each evening. Though they possessed comfort, security, and all the material blessings that many desired, there remained one sorrow that neither wealth nor devotion could ease. They had no children. For years they hoped, for years they prayed. With each passing season, they imagined what it might be like to hear the laughter of a child echo through the halls of their home. Yet year after year, the nursery remained empty. Behind the house stood an old juniper tree. It grew near the garden wall, its evergreen branches spreading wide even in winter when every other tree stood bare. The wife often sat beneath it during the quiet hours of the afternoon. There was something comforting about its presence. Its scent lingered sweetly in the air, and its dark green needles seemed untouched by the passing seasons. One winter day, as snow covered the ground and the sky hung low and pale above the earth, the woman stood beneath the juniper tree peeling an apple. The garden was silent except for the faint rustle of wind moving through the branches overhead. As she cut the fruit, the knife slipped. A small drop of blood fell onto the snow. The bright red stain spread across the white surface like a tiny crimson flower. The woman stared at it. The contrast struck her deeply. White snow, red blood. Without fully understanding why, she whispered a wish. If only I had a child as white as snow and as red as blood. The wind stirred softly through the branches above her. For the first time in many years, hope entered her heart. Not long afterward, she discovered she was with child. Joy filled the household. The months that followed seemed touched by a strange kind of magic. The woman spent long hours in the garden beneath the juniper tree, watching the seasons change around her. As spring arrived, blossoms opened throughout the orchard. As summer warmed the earth, she felt the child growing stronger. As autumn painted the leaves gold and crimson, she dreamed of the future. But when winter returned, so too did a shadow she could not explain. The closer she came to giving birth, the weaker she seemed to become. One evening, as snow once again began falling across the garden, she called her husband to her side. Her face was pale yet peaceful. "If our child is born," she said softly, "promise me something." "Anything. Bury me beneath the juniper tree." The merchant tried to dismiss her fears, but deep inside, dread had already begun to grow. Soon afterward, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. His skin was fair as snow. His cheeks were red as blood. For a brief moment, joy filled the room. Then the mother smiled one final time and passed away. The merchant's grief was overwhelming. Though he adored his son, every glance at the child reminded him of what he had lost. He honored his wife's final wish and buried her beneath the juniper tree. As the years passed, the boy grew strong, intelligent, and kind. Whenever he felt lonely, he often wandered into the garden and sat beneath the juniper tree. Though he did not fully understand why, he always felt close to his mother there. The merchant eventually remarried. His new wife was beautiful and clever. At first, she seemed affectionate toward the boy. In time, however, she gave birth to a daughter of her own. The little girl was named Marlene. Unlike her mother, Marlene possessed a gentle heart. She loved her older brother dearly. They played together in the garden and shared stories beneath the juniper tree. Yet as the years passed, something dark began growing within their mother. The more she looked upon her son, the more she saw him as an obstacle. Everything her husband owned would one day belong to him. Everything her daughter might inherit depended upon his existence. Jealousy slowly poisoned her thoughts. At first, it appeared only occasionally. A cold glance, a harsh word, a moment of impatience. But over time, those feelings deepened into something far more dangerous. Whenever she saw the boy laughing with his father, resentment twisted within her. Whenever she imagined the future, she saw her own daughter receiving less because of him. The darkness grew until it consumed her completely. One afternoon, when autumn leaves drifted across the garden and grey clouds gathered overhead, the woman put a basket of apples in a wooden chest near the kitchen. The chest was large and heavy, with an iron lid that closed tightly. Later that day, the boy returned home from school. As he entered the house, his stepmother greeted him with unusual kindness. "You look hungry." The boy smiled politely. "May I have an apple?" "Of course," she replied. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. She opened the chest. "Choose whichever one you like." The boy stepped forward and leaned inside. In that instant, the woman slammed the heavy lid shut. The lid came down with terrible force. The room fell silent, so completely silent that even the ticking of the old clock seemed to stop. For several long moments, the woman stood frozen, unable to breathe. What she had imagined in anger had become real in a single irreversible instant. The deed was done. Panic quickly replaced her rage. She had achieved what she wanted, yet horror flooded her mind. She did not know what to do. Fear of discovery overwhelmed her. Desperation led her to commit an even more terrible act. When Marlene returned home, she found her brother seated motionless near the chest. Confused, she approached him. Her mother instructed her to ask him for an apple. When he did not answer, Marlene gently touched him. The truth became clear. The little girl burst into tears, but her mother silenced her. "If you tell anyone, terrible things will happen." Marlene cried throughout the evening. Her grief filled the house like a storm cloud. The merchant returned home, unaware of what had happened. His wife prepared a grand supper. A rich stew simmered upon the stove. The smell filled every room. Throughout the meal, the merchant repeatedly asked where his son had gone. Each time, his wife offered another explanation. Eventually, the merchant stopped asking, yet he felt strangely unsettled. Meanwhile, Marlene sat silently at the table, tears slipping down her cheeks. Every bite became harder to swallow. When supper ended, she gathered what remained of her brother and carried them into the garden. There, beneath the juniper tree where his mother lay buried, she wept. Her tears fell onto the earth. The wind began to move. The branches rustled overhead. A strange mist gathered around the tree. The air seemed to shimmer, and then something miraculous happened. From the juniper tree emerged a magnificent bird. Its feathers glowed with colors unlike anything seen in nature. Red and gold flashed through its wings. Its eyes shone with intelligence. As it rose into the sky, it began to sing. The song carried beauty and sorrow in equal measure. Those who heard it stopped whatever they were doing and listened. Yet hidden within the melody was the truth. The bird sang of betrayal, of innocence lost, of justice waiting patiently to arrive. The bird traveled across the countryside. Everywhere it went, people were captivated by its song. A goldsmith gave the bird a beautiful golden chain. A shoemaker gifted a pair of fine red shoes. A miller offered a great millstone. The bird accepted each gift and continued its journey. At last it returned to the house upon the hill. The merchant sat outside. Marlene stood nearby. The stepmother remained within. The bird landed upon the roof and began singing once more. The merchant listened in wonder. The song filled him with both joy and sadness. As a reward, the bird dropped the golden chain around his neck. Marlene received the red shoes and danced happily for the first time since her brother's disappearance. Then the stepmother emerged from the house. Fear gripped her heart. The song seemed directed at her alone. The bird spread its wings. Above her, the great millstone slipped free. What followed brought an end to the evil she had unleashed. The sky suddenly grew calm. The bird descended once more into the garden. A brilliant light surrounded it. Slowly the feathers vanished. The wings disappeared, and standing beneath the juniper tree was the boy himself, restored to life. Whole, healthy, the merchant rushed forward. Marlene threw her arms around her brother. The family embraced beneath the branches of the tree where so much sorrow had begun. At last the truth had been revealed. At last justice had been done. The years that followed were peaceful. The shadow that had hung over the household lifted. The children grew older together. The merchant never forgot the miracle that had returned his son. And whenever they walked through the garden, they paused beneath the old juniper tree. Its branches still whispered in the wind. Its scent still drifted through the air. And beneath its evergreen boughs lived the memory of a mother's love, a sister's devotion, and the mysterious forces that sometimes bring justice to the world when human hands cannot. Though the juniper tree is one of the darkest Grimm fairy tales, it is also one of the most hauntingly beautiful. Beneath its Gothic imagery lies a story about grief, remembrance, and the belief that innocence, though harmed, cannot be erased forever. you.